In 399 BC, the city of Athens put a man on trial, not for murder, not for theft, not for treason in any conventional sense, for asking questions, for standing in the marketplace and engaging people in conversation about justice and virtue and the nature of good governance. In the city that invented democracy, that gave the world the concept of free citizens governing themselves, sentenced its greatest philosopher to death for the specific crime of making people think. Socrates drank the hemlock. His student Plato recorded the trial and the execution in documents that are still read 2,500 years later. The specific charge was corrupting the youth of Athens and impiety. What it actually was a government that had decided certain conversations were too dangerous to permit, that the questions being asked were more threatening to power than any sword. That was 399 BC, the first recorded execution for speech in Western history, and it happened in the world's first democracy. Jump forward to 1215, English barons forcing King John to sign the Magna Carta at Runnymede. The specific principle being established, the state cannot imprison a free man without due process and lawful judgment of his peers. 800 years of British legal tradition built on that moment, the foundation on which every British court still technically operates. The specific promise made by the English crown to the English people that the arbitrary imprisonment of citizens for the convenience of power was finished. Jump forward to the First World War. The Somme, July 1st, 1916. 57,470 British casualties in a single day. Young men from working-class towns across Britain, Rotherham, Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, the same towns now appearing in grooming gangs inquiry reports, going over the top at 7:30 in the morning into machine gun fire. They were told they were fighting for Britain, for freedom, for the right of a free people to live under laws that protected them. I often wonder what the boys of the Somme would think of Britain in 2026, and then we move on, because the question answers itself. Now, jump forward to 1921. Soviet Russia. The Bolsheviks have been in power for 4 years. They have created a new legal category: anti-Soviet agitation, Article 58 of the Soviet Penal Code, the dissemination of fabrications discrediting the Soviet state. You did not have to lie, you did not have to call for violence, you did not have to organize anything, you just had to say something the state had decided it did not want said. And then the knock came at the door. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was sentenced to 8 years in the Gulag for writing a private letter to a friend criticizing Stalin's military leadership. Not published, not distributed, a private letter intercepted by the KGB. 8 years of forced labor in Siberia. The poet Osip Mandelstam wrote 16 lines of poetry about Stalin in 1933. He read it to a small group of friends. Someone reported him. He was arrested. He died in a transit camp in 1938. 16 lines of poetry read aloud in a room. After Stalin's death, the camps became less common. The system found something more elegant. Soviet psychiatrists developed a new diagnosis: creeping schizophrenia. The logic was perfect. If the Soviet system was correct, then anyone who persistently criticized it must be mentally ill. The hospital replaced the camp. The outcome was the same. You were removed from public life. Your words were discredited by your diagnosis. Your family bore the stigma. In the 1970s, there were around 90 criminal convictions per year in the Soviet Union under the anti-agitation articles. Samizdat, self-published banned texts typed on onion skin paper with carbon copies and passed hand to hand, became the underground method of sharing information the state had decided the public should not have. Possession of a single Samizdat manuscript was a serious crime. A visit from the KGB, Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote, "In keeping silent about evil, in burying it so deep within us that no sign of it appears on the surface, we are implanting it, and it will rise up 1,000-fold in the future. When we neither punish nor reproach evildoers, we are not simply protecting their trivial old age, we are thereby ripping the foundations of justice from beneath new generations." He was writing about the Soviet Union. Read it again in 2026. Tacitus, the Roman historian who watched the Roman Republic die and the empire replace it, wrote in the 1st century that the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws. He was documenting what he saw in real time. A governing class that had stopped serving the people it governed using legislation to protect itself from accountability. Each new law narrowing the space in which citizens could speak honestly about what they saw. Each new restriction framed as necessary and reasonable. The accumulated effect being the disappearance of the republic that had made Rome great, and the emergence of something that wore its forms while gutting its substance. He would recognize 2026 Europe immediately. George Orwell in 1945 wrote the preface to Animal Farm. A preface his publisher suppressed because the book criticized Stalin while the USSR was a British wartime ally. The Ministry of Information in Britain in 1945 tried to prevent the publication of a satirical novel. Orwell wrote in that suppressed preface, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear." Now tell me where that liberty exists in Western Europe today. Today, June 18th, 2026, a French woman named Haïs Descoufon is waiting for a verdict. She is an abuse survivor. 4 years ago, she survived an attack by a Tunisian migrant. In 2023, she appeared on BFM TV, one of France's major news channels, to defend a woman who had been attacked by a Central African man in the courtyard of her own Paris apartment building. She said on television that the main danger for women in France is immigrant men, Africans, blacks and Arabs. France's government anti-racism body DILCRA filed a criminal complaint. The prosecutor dismissed both women's experiences as insignificant incidents which did not excuse the hate speech. Today she faces 6 months in prison and a €3,500 fine. Her attacker walks free. She may go to prison for describing him. In Belgium in May 2026, a former member of the Belgian Federal Parliament named Dries van Langenhove was convicted of hate speech. He had given a lecture at the Catholic University of Leuven. He presented data about migration, crime statistics, and educational outcomes. He cited the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. He cited peer-reviewed academic research from institutions the EU itself funds. The judge convicted him. The specific line in the judgment, "Even if all of the statements made by Van Langenhove are based on scientific evidence and statistics, it makes no difference to the criminal intent." He was not charged with lying. He was convicted for presenting accurate information. A left-wing Belgian philosopher who opposes everything Van Langenhove stands for wrote publicly, "In a liberal country, you are not condemned for discussing the overrepresentation of certain population groups in crime statistics." Belgium is not behaving like a liberal country. In Germany, and this is the part that should make everyone uncomfortable given what that country's history actually teaches, the Interior Minister Nancy Faeser reported multiple citizens to the police for criticizing her on social media. She is in charge of law enforcement. She used law enforcement against her own critics. Robert Habeck, the Vice-Chancellor, filed over 800 criminal complaints against people who criticized him. A pensioner who posted a parody of a shampoo advert replacing Schwarzkopf with Schwachkopf, idiot head, was prosecuted for a shampoo joke about a politician. A journalist published a satirical meme of Faeser holding a sign saying, "I hate freedom of speech." She reported the journalist to the police. He received a 7-month suspended sentence for a meme. In June 2025, German police launched coordinated raids on 170 homes in a single morning targeting people for online posts. In 2023, British police made 12,183 arrests under legislation targeting offensive communications. 33 arrests every single day. Since 2017, there have been over 65,000 such arrests in Britain. The number has more than doubled in 6 years. Freedom House, the organisation that monitors civil liberties globally, the same organisation that grades authoritarian states on their human rights record, downgraded Britain's internet freedom score in 2025 specifically because of the proliferation of criminal charges for online speech, including speech protected under international human rights standards. J.D. Vance said it at the Munich Security Conference in February 2025. He accused European governments of retreating from free expression. Marco Rubio issued formal guidance warning American citizens that they could be arrested when visiting Europe for old social media posts. Elon Musk called it real fascism. These are the US Vice President, the US Secretary of State, and the world's richest man, looking at Western Europe and using the language of authoritarianism. A couple in Hertfordshire, Maxie Allen and Rosalind Levine, criticised their daughter's school in WhatsApp messages, private messages. The school reported them. 6 police officers arrived at their home. They were arrested for private messages in a private conversation. Rupert Lowe, the MP who just published the 218-page inquiry documenting the systematic abuse of 250,000 British children, had his own home raided by police. The raid was initiated by former colleagues making allegations about words he had allegedly spoken. He received a death threat on social media saying, "I will gladly make an exception to my opposition to the death penalty for you." The police took no action on the death threat. They raided his house for alleged speech. The government is simultaneously releasing thousands of violent and sexual offenders early because there is not enough prison space. The same prison estate that cannot accommodate convicted rapists has space for people who write angry things online. Now, the VPN situation. Because this is where you see the direction of travel most clearly, the Online Safety Act took effect in Britain in July 2025. It requires photo, ID, facial scans, or credit card verification to access adult content online. VPN use immediately jumped 1,400% as people sought to preserve their privacy. In January 2026, the House of Lords voted to ban VPN provision to under 18s. The House of Commons rejected that specific amendment in March. But Parliament enacted a general power that can be used to restrict access to specified internet services. Britain's Secretary of State for Science said publicly, "For everybody thinking of using VPNs, let me just say to you directly, just don't try to find a way around. The countries where VPNs are currently banned, North Korea, Turkmenistan, Belarus, Iraq, Myanmar, Oman. That is the current list of states that have decided their citizens should not have the ability to browse the internet without government visibility. Britain is not on that list yet. The government says there are no plans to ban VPNs outright. The same government that in January 2026 was voting in the House of Lords to ban them for under 18s. The same government that told people not to try to find a way around the surveillance. The sequence is documented and in progress right now. Step 1. Chat control, scanning private messages. The EU has been fighting over its child sexual abuse regulation for 3 years. A voluntary version was approved in November 2025. Step 2. Age verification. Britain's Online Safety Act, July 2025, requiring ID to access the internet. Step 3. VPN restrictions. The power is now enacted. The direction is set. Each step is framed around protecting children. Each step expands state visibility of what citizens do online. Each step reduces the ability of ordinary people to communicate or access information without the state having a record of it. The Soviet Union controlled copying machines to prevent the reproduction of samizdat. The British state is moving toward controlling the tools that allow private internet use. Different technology, identical function. Now the specific connection that ties all of this together. Because the prosecution of speech and the failure to prosecute actual crime are not separate stories. They are the same story. For decades in Britain, girls were being systematically abused in dozens of towns. The people who tried to raise the alarm were told to stay quiet. Police officers who investigated were disciplined or ignored. Journalists who wrote about it faced accusations of racism. The institutional machinery, the same machinery now arresting 33 people a day for online posts, was deployed against anyone who drew attention to what was happening to British children. The girls were failed because the institutions were more afraid of being accused of racism than of failing the children. That specific institutional logic is the same logic that prosecutes a French abuse survivor for describing her attacker on television. The same logic that convicted a Belgian politician for presenting crime statistics. The same logic that had British police more concerned about the optics of investigating Pakistani grooming gangs than about the children being destroyed in their jurisdiction. The state protected the perpetrators, then arrested the people who talked about it. After the Southport murders in 2024, people across Britain expressed their anger online. Some of those expressions were ugly, some were genuinely threatening. The state's response was 1,840 arrests, courts processing people aged from 11 to 81. Lucy Connolly, a childminder, jailed for 31 months for a tweet she deleted in 3.5 hours. Meanwhile, the statutory inquiry into the grooming gang scandal, the abuse of 250,000 children over 7 decades, has not yet produced a single additional prosecution. One tweet, 31 months, 250,000 children abused over 70 years, the inquiry is ongoing. Those are the priorities of the British state in 2026, and now where does this end? Because that is the honest question. The Soviet Union did not announce on a Tuesday that it was building a totalitarian system. It built one through the accumulation of individually defensible legal measures, laws against slander, laws against incitement, laws against fabrications discrediting the state, laws against anti-Soviet agitation, each one narrowly scoped when introduced, each one expanded through prosecutorial discretion and judicial interpretation, each one added to the others until the range of permissible speech had contracted to the point where saying what you saw was a criminal act. Britain has the Communications Act 2003, the Public Order Act 1986, the Online Safety Act 2023 with its new powers enacted in 2026, 65,000 arrests since 2017 for online speech, the general power to restrict internet services now on the statute book, the stated intention to look very closely at VPN use. Belgium has its anti-racism law of 1981, interpreted in 2026 to mean that presenting accurate statistics is a crime if a judge decides you presented them in a way that incited hatred. France has its hate speech legislation interpreted to mean that an abuse survivor describing her attacker on television can be sentenced to prison. The Magna Carta established in 1215 that a free man could not be imprisoned without lawful judgment of his peers. The British courts now process online speech offences through magistrates' courts. No jury, no judge with a law degree required, no constitutional protection for the speech that brought you there. A sentence of up to 6 months can be imposed for a tweet, without the defendant ever appearing before a judge who has studied law. George Orwell understood what was coming. He had watched it in Spain. He had watched the British establishment try to suppress Animal Farm during the war. He wrote in 1984, and if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. He was writing fiction. He was describing a mechanism he had watched operate in reality. The mechanism is operating in reality again, in 2026, in countries that spent the Cold War telling the world they were the alternative to all of that. Solzhenitsyn came back to Russia after the Soviet Union fell. He watched the new freedoms slowly erode again. He wrote that the line between good and evil passes not through states or between classes or between political parties, but right through every human heart, through the choice each person makes about whether to speak or stay silent when speaking costs them something. The boys of the Somme went over the top on July 1st, 1916 for a Britain that they believed stood for something specific. The right of a free people to speak, to think, to hold their government to account, to say what they saw without fearing the knock at the door. That Britain still exists. Somewhere underneath the 65,000 arrests and the VPN surveillance plans and the magistrates' courts processing tweets and the government ministers telling people not to try to find a way around the restrictions, the question is whether enough people notice in time to matter. The Soviet dissidents did not save the Soviet Union from itself. They saved the record. They made sure the truth existed somewhere, so that when the system finally collapsed, the people inside it had something to rebuild from. That is the work now. Not the dramatic gesture, the consistent, daily, undramatic act of saying what you see, sharing what you know, funding the inquiry when the state will not hold it, building the channels that exist outside the institutional architecture that has decided certain conversations are too dangerous to permit. The Gulag was built from silence. The Samizdat was built from the refusal to be silent. Which one are you building? Let me go deeper into the history, because the modern cases make more sense when you understand the pattern they belong to. This is not new. This is ancient. And the fact that it is ancient means something important. It means every civilization that has ever tried to suppress speech has eventually discovered the same thing. That it does not work. That the attempt to silence produces exactly the energy it was designed to extinguish. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, understood before anyone had words for it that accusation is itself a punishment. You did not need to be convicted, you needed to be named. The social and economic consequences of being accused of heresy preceded any legal finding by months or years. Your business partners withdrew, your family distanced themselves, your community marked you. The formal verdict was almost secondary to the process of being accused. By the time acquittal came, if it came, the damage was done. The mechanism is identical to what is called being cancelled in 2026. Being called racist in modern Western Europe carries the pre-conviction devastation that being named a heretic carried in 1490s Spain. The formal legal prosecution sometimes follows, sometimes it does not need to. The social and professional consequences of the accusation do the work on their own. The court case is the confirmation of something that has already happened socially. Thomas More was executed in 1535, not for saying the wrong thing, but for refusing to say the right thing. Henry VIII's Lord Chancellor would not endorse the king's break with Rome. He said nothing. He simply refused to declare loyalty. That silence was enough. The state requiring not just the absence of dissent, but the active performance of agreement. Compelled speech as the test of loyalty. The compelled speech dimension of modern European censorship is less visible than the prosecutions, but it is there. The diversity and inclusion training that European corporations and government bodies require their employees to complete, the mandatory statements of institutional values that public sector workers must affirm, the social expectation that individuals demonstrate their position on the approved side of approved questions, the penalty for silence that is read as dissent. More died for his silence. The mechanism has not changed. The printing press was invented in 1440. Within decades, every major European government had created a system of licensing for printers specifically to control what could be published. The first censorship regimes were not about protecting national security or preventing violence. They were about controlling the flow of ideas that the state had decided were dangerous to its authority. Galileo was put under house arrest in 1633 not for doing mathematics but for saying publicly what his mathematics showed, that the earth moved around the sun, not the other way around. The Vatican's theological authority depended on the fixed earth. The accurate scientific observation threatened authority. The observation was therefore a crime. The authorities in Galileo's case were not stupid. They understood what he was saying, and they understood that it was probably correct. What they also understood was that if his observation was accepted, it undermined the basis of their institutional authority. The prosecution was not about truth, it was about power. The same logic, not charging people with lying, charging them with saying accurate things in ways that undermine institutional authority, runs directly from Galileo's trial in 1633 to the Belgian court's conviction of Van Langenhove in 2026. He was not charged with spreading false information. He was convicted for presenting accurate information in a way the court decided was threatening to social cohesion. Galileo was not charged with bad mathematics. He was convicted for accurately describing the solar system in a way the church decided was threatening to theological authority. 400 years, the same charge, the same logic, the same function. Now the British trajectory, specifically, because Britain is doing something that France and Germany and Belgium are also doing, but Britain is doing it in a way that is particularly visible, given what Britain has historically claimed to stand for. Britain gave the world the concept of parliamentary sovereignty, the idea that the legislature represents the people and the people's representatives make the law. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 established the constitutional settlement that made Britain, for the following 3 centuries, the most politically stable major country in the world, not because it was perfectly governed, because it had a framework for managing disagreement that did not require violence and did not require the suppression of dissent. That framework is now being used against the people it was designed to protect. The same parliament that established that the Crown could not arbitrarily imprison its citizens without lawful process is now passing legislation that allows magistrates to imprison people for tweets, without a jury and without a legally qualified judge. The same constitutional tradition that produced the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, the Reform Acts, is now producing the Online Safety Act and its general power to restrict access to specified internet services. The constitutional framework did not change suddenly, it changed incrementally, each piece of legislation individually defensible, the net effect across decades being the contraction of the space in which ordinary people can speak freely about things the state has decided are sensitive. And the state has decided something very specific is sensitive, not violence, not genuine threats, not incitement to concrete harm. The topics: immigration, crime statistics, grooming gangs, the demographic transformation of British cities. These are the topics that generate prosecutions, not the manner of speaking about them, the topics themselves. The prosecution of Lucy Connolly was partly about her specific words, but it was also about the subject matter those words addressed. The 12,000 annual arrests do not distribute evenly across topics. They concentrate on specific subjects that the institutional culture has decided are dangerous to discuss. The Soviet Union's apparatus concentrated on anti-Soviet agitation, criticism of the state and its policies. The British apparatus concentrates on speech that the state has decided relates to race and immigration, different categories, identical selectivity. The law does not apply equally to all speech, it applies to the speech the state has decided requires managing. The Samizdat writers in the Soviet Union understood something that the people being arrested in Britain today are beginning to understand, that when the state decides certain topics cannot be discussed in the permitted channels, it creates both the necessity and the audience for the unpermitted ones. Every arrest for a social media post is an advertisement for the channels that exist outside the state's enforcement reach. Every prosecution of a journalist for a satirical meme is a demonstration that the satirical meme touched something the state needed to protect. Solzhenitsyn's books were banned in the Soviet Union. They were read by everyone. The copies passed from hand to hand, worn thin, held together with tape. The state's attempt to suppress them created a hunger for them that official publication could never have produced. The Gulag Archipelago was published in the West in 1973. By 1974, Solzhenitsyn was expelled from the Soviet Union because the state had finally understood that the attempt to suppress the book was doing more damage than the book itself. The British state has not yet learned this lesson. Every prosecution for an online post about grooming gangs increases the search volume for information about grooming gangs. Every arrest for saying something about immigration increases the audience for the channels where people say things about immigration without fear of arrest. The suppression creates the demand. The internet exists. The information exists. The people who have conclusions the state finds uncomfortable have found each other and are talking. The arrests are not stopping this, they are documenting it. They are creating a public record of the state deciding that specific conversations are too dangerous to permit. And that public record is itself evidence. The boys at the Somme would not have gone over the top for a country that arrests 33 of its citizens every day for things they said online. They went for a Britain they believe stood for something different. Whether that Britain ever fully existed or was always partly a story a civilization told itself, it was a story worth telling. It produced something. It produced a constitutional tradition, an expectation of liberty, a culture of speaking plainly that made this island one of the most intellectually generative places in human history. That tradition is not dead. The 23,000 people who funded Rupert Lowe's inquiry are part of it. The journalists who keep filing freedom of information requests to document the arrest statistics are part of it. The MPs who stood in Parliament and demanded the Somme veterans' country behave like the Somme veterans' country are part of it. The Gulag was built from silence, not from one dramatic decision made on one day, from the accumulation of small silences made by millions of ordinary people who decided each day that it was safer to say nothing. The samizdat was built from the refusal of a smaller number of ordinary people to let that silence be complete. They did not save the Soviet Union, they saved the truth. They made sure it existed somewhere so that when the system that had tried to suppress it finally failed, the people on the other side had something real to rebuild from. That is the work. Not heroic, not dramatic. The consistent refusal to pretend that what is happening is not happening. The consistent documentation of what the state is doing and what it is hiding. The funding of the inquiry the state refused to hold. The building of the channels that exist outside the institutional architecture that has decided certain conversations are too dangerous to permit. The question is not whether to speak. The question is whether the people who can see what is happening are willing to be